In the summer of 1889, the glittering mansions of Newport, Rhode Island, buzzed with rumors about Isadora Pennington, a young widow whose fortune came from her late husband's trans-Atlantic shipping empire, known for her extravagant salons and whispered affairs with European diplomats. Pennington's name was suddenly erased from society pages after one scandalous evening at the Belcourt Pavilion Ball. Witnesses later claimed she was escorted home in a closed carriage shortly after midnight and was never seen again. The following morning, servants found the Pennington estate in disarray, mirrors draped in black cloth, luggage packed but untouched, and a half-written letter sealed with a wax crest depicting a snake devouring its own tail. Local police declared her fled abroad in shame, yet no ship logs ever recorded her departure. In 1903, a caretaker renovating the mansion discovered a hidden room brick behind the library wall. Inside were a faded dress, a set of opera gloves, and a single calling card bearing her initials and the words, "I will not be erased." The Newport Historical Society maintains one surviving telegram from her brother, sent 2 weeks after her disappearance. It reads simply, "The family name must not be spoken again." To this day, Isadora Pennington's disappearance remains one of the most chilling unsolved scandals in Gilded Age high society. A story of power obsession and the lengths the elite would go to bury their own secrets. Titled The Untold Story of the Disgraced Socialite Who Disappeared 1889, Rhode Island, Autumn 1903. Newport, Rhode Island. A caretaker with mortar on his sleeves taps the back wall of a private library on Ochre Point and hears the sound carpenter's dread hollow, where blueprints swear there should be stone. He prays at the seam between shelf and panel, slides a bar into the mortar, and levers carefully until the wall softens, then gives. Dust rolls out like old breath. Behind the bricks is a room no bigger than a dressing closet. On a chair, a faded silk evening dress collapsed upon itself, the blue gone to gray. Draped across the arm, a pair of opera gloves, stiff with time. On a small table under a film of ash rests a calling card thick as bone. Its face is simple IP, and beneath, in a hand that does not tremble, 4 words, "I will not be erased." The caretaker folds the card in a rag and carries it to the Newport Historical Society, where a junior archivist, hands inked and careful, slips it into an envelope. In the same box, they keep a telegram, 1 page, 2 weeks older than a scandal that never made it to the courts. It is addressed to the Newport police, signed by a name that once opened doors in Boston and shut mouths in Providence. The family name must not be spoken again. And now wind back 14 years, summer of 1889, when the mansions along Bellevue Avenue burned coal and money with the same serene appetite, and the names on calling cards were currency. Isadora Pennington was the season's magnet, a young widow crowned by tragedy and a shipping fortune. Her late husband's trans-Atlantic empire sent coal and cloth and gossip between New York and Le Havre faster than the weather could cross the ocean. She hosted salons where diplomats drank too much Madeira and said too much about borders. She wore scandal the way other women wore perfume. Then came the Belcourt Pavilion Ball. It was supposed to be a gilded night, like so many others, lanterns floating like planets in the garden, a string quartet that made even unkind hearts feel tender, the sound of ocean against stone just beyond the hedge. At midnight, according to a footman's sworn statement preserved in the police daybook, 2 men escorted Isadora from the east salon to a closed carriage at the rear gate. They were discreet. She was not at all hysterical. The door shut. The horses hesitated, then moved. The coach turned left, toward the ocean road. She was never seen again. At dawn, the Pennington estate on Ochre Point was unnaturally still. Servants unlocked the front hall to find the mirrors veiled in black cloth. Victorian households draped mirrors in mourning, so that souls wouldn't be trapped in glass. And every upstairs trunk open, lined with tissue, half-packed. In the writing room, an envelope lay sealed with red wax impressed with a snake eating its own tail. The Ouroboros, the symbol of eternity and recurrence. Inside, a letter arresting in its incompletion. "My dear," it reads, "I have been told to be ready for departure. There are matters you do not." The line stops. The next page is blank. Newport police wrote a phrase that would be repeated with relief by those who needed this to be tidy. Fled abroad in shame. The society columns followed orders at once. Isidora's name, which had fluttered across a dozen pages a week, dried up. Guests who had been seen laughing at her table were suddenly never there. Editors clipped her out of time. Certain indiscretions, a Providence gentleman wrote in his diary that season, corrected themselves. Only the harbor refused the script. Shipping agents in New York and Boston kept meticulous passenger lists. Kimmard, Inman, Allen, none recorded an Isidora, a Mrs. Pennington, or any woman with her dimensions and complexion boarding in those days or the weeks after. The harbor master's ledger in Newport bristles with departures and arrivals. None fits the woman in the carriage who did not scream. The bricked room discovered in 1903 put splinters into the official story. If Isidora fled, why did her evening dress, worn only once, sit in the dark with her opera gloves and a card that reads like a vow? If she died, who draped the mirrors before the household woke? If she left willingly, why does the only surviving letter appear ambushed mid-sentence by a seal that belongs on a family crest or an esoteric society's invitation? The records we have, those that survived some very efficient forgetting, draw a line from the ball to the carriage to the sealed proclamation from a brother who could silence more than servants. The records we do not have, private admissions logs, friendly police notes, the upright diaries that omit what their writers broil with shame, vacuum the air around that line until it hums. Newport was a city of curated illusions, of borrowed nobility, of marble Corinthian columns holding up men built of paper and iron. In that summer, the light fell just so through the salt haze, and a woman who had become a rumor by living too brightly stepped into a carriage and became something colder than that. But why did this happen? And why was it erased from history? Before we continue, if this story intrigues you, subscribe and ring the bell, so you never miss our deep dives into America's darkest historical mysteries. And tell us what city or state you're listening from. We love hearing from our community of history enthusiasts. Before rumor made her two-dimensional, Isidora Pennington was edges and light, carved by context as much as choice. She married at 19 to Arthur Pennington, 30 years her senior, whose ships fed the lamps of both coasts, and whose name sat very snugly on the boards of banks that looked like temples. He died in 1887, a stroke aboard ship, halfway between Southampton and New York. The newspapers printed a portrait of his widow, veiled and erect. The will, probated quietly in Providence, left her the townhouse, the Ochre Point estate, and an income that would buy 5 orchestras and a scandal a season. The bulk of the fleet, its hulls, its contracts, went to a trust staffed by men who smiled for photographers and kept ledgers sharper than their smiles. Isidora took her grief public, then private. By the summer of 1888, she was hosting French attachés with too much perfume, English envoys with their own wives far away, New York lawyers who came for the view and stayed to draft contracts that never saw daylight. The Providence Journal called her salons brilliant. A Boston columnist, less charitable, wrote, "Mrs. Pennington excels at hunting from a seated position. Newport's Catholicity had limits. Widows were to glitter, not blaze. Belcourt Pavilion, on loan that night, if you believe the invitations preserved in a social secretary's trunk, was the season stage. The railroads had made Newport a summer capital. Social arbitration happened under chandeliers. Men brokered coal and alliance over waltzes. Women negotiated futures with fans and time. Everyone took notes with their eyes. There were whispers before the ball. A diplomat seen too often. A dance that lasted a beat too long. A letter delivered and returned unopened. A family attorney, his calm more polished than his boots, counseling caution. The crest on the seal of her discarded envelope, Ouroboros, appeared elsewhere in her library, impressed in gilt on the spine of a small volume of alchemical essays, and a guest list for a salon on cycles, and the eternal return. We do not know whether the snake was her symbol or one borrowed for a night to sharpen a party's theme. We do know that image returns like an itch throughout the papers that survived the season, the circle that swallows itself to begin again. The Belkert Pavilion bowl opened with Strauss and intentions. Isidore arrived late, a choice and not a fox pass. Her dress, described in a column that was pulled from the next edition, but survives in a bound set at the Newport Historical Society, was colored silk with a train that moved like tide. She danced with a baron, the kind manufactured by effort, with a banker, the kind that manufactures effort, and with a man the programs described only as M. From Paris. Just before midnight, a small ripple crossed the floor. Not a shout, a change in pressure. A woman's laugh extinguished mid-archy. A touch of black at the edge of a fan that should have been white. Witnesses disagree on what pricked the night. One says a letter delivered. A red envelope, a quick glance, her mouth tightening in something that was not fear so much as decision. Another says a whisper hissed near the terrace about funds misallocated, a trust that did not trust her, new terms drafted in rooms she did not enter. At 12:15, a footman recalls, Mrs. Pennington excused herself. A second, posted at the service door, saw two men in evening coats, hats low, faces unremarkable in the designed way of men hired to blend, wait beside a closed carriage. One set a hand at her elbow. She did not resist. She lifted her hem so it would not crush, stepped into the carriage, sat, and looked not at either man but at the far wall of the court, where moonlight made a false door of shadow. The door shut. The carriage rolled away, iron ringing faint on stone. A coachman later said the horses were held in check at the corner, long enough to be noted, not long enough to be stopped. I thought they might be letting someone in, he confessed years later. But then they turned toward the cliffs, and the night ate them. Inside the pavilion, the quartet resumed. The waltz took the room back and made it feel like a kindness. Isidora's name never crossed a lip again in that place. Servants who have seen too much know when air is wrong. At the Pennington estate, dawn bled light into a house that had been told to be quiet. Every mirror wore black. Piano shawls, nitresses, anything at hand. In good houses, you do this after a death to prevent the spirit from being trapped. Who did it here, and for whom, is the next question a rational mind runs from. Trunks stood open upstairs like mouths prepared to speak. Chemises packed in one, gloves in another, jewels arrayed, and then not taken. Violets, carefully ordered the night before, lay crushed in their vase, as if someone had realized mid-breath that departure might be performance enough. On a writing desk, an envelope thick with paper, sealed with a red wax snake biting its tail. Inside, a letter snapped off mid-flight. My dear, I have been told to be ready for departure. There are matters you do not. The pen scored into the page, as if the writer hadn't lifted it gently so much as had it taken from her. There is a drop on the margin that could be ink, could be something else. The butler sent for police. A constable arrived, respectful in the way men are when money is present. He walked through rooms that were rehearsing grief and found no body. He wrote, Mrs. P. likely fled abroad. The kind of sentence that saves you paperwork. The harbor master was summoned and nodded. It happens. He did not check his ledger. By noon, the family attorney had entered the house, hat in hand, and left it with an envelope. He sent a telegram now at the NHS, not to the police but to her brother, rumors. See to it. 2 weeks later came the brother's reply, the one with the imperative that swallowed a name. The family name must not be spoken again. Ship's clerks in New York, when asked weeks afterward by a small indignant reporter, could find no Pennington on any list. A woman matching description. We don't catalog faces, one said. Then, reluctantly, Kinman, Guion, no seat, no berth, no cabin. Between 1889 and 1903, Isidora exists primarily as a negative space. Society pages omit her. The Pennington Trust quietly rearranges beneficiaries. The Ochre Point estate goes unlet. The lawns are kept as if the house were a patient asleep upstairs. Gardeners come and go. A caretaker is hired who takes pride in clean gutters and straight lines. He does not ask questions of silence. During renovations in 1903, an effort to modernize the library, to add shelving for books that would never be read, workmen identify a section of wall with strange resonance. It is not exactly weight-bearing. It is not exactly empty. They chip mortar. They lift out bricks. They let the dark breathe. Inside, not a body, not a confession, just artifacts that feel like a postponed decision. The silk dress, salt-stained at the hem. Opera gloves crossed like a pair of sleeping arms. The calling card with the initials and the promise, "I will not be erased." Who bricked them in? If it was a lover, why monument not X? If it was a brother, why include a line that refuses obedience? If it was Isadora, if the room was prepared by her as a ledger of last resort, what message did she expect a future to read? The Newport Historical Society has the card. They kept the telegram. The dress and gloves are recorded in a renovation foreman's notebook with a page number and the phrase, "Return to family." Which family and where, the line does not say. The police file is thin as a trick. The newspapers of August 1889 record weather, yachting, and a minor scandal about a chef. They do not record a missing woman. When paper fails, speculation rushes in. In the case of Isadora Pennington, its footnotes are written in pencil and its theories smell of salt and privilege. Theory 1. Flight by private yacht. If Isadora skipped the liners, she could have stepped onto a private vessel. Newport bristled with them. A berth could be arranged with a handshake and a fee. The carriage turns toward the ocean road. A launch waits below the cliffs. A ladder, an arm, a hush. By dawn she is hulled down toward the sound. The appeal of this story is its elegance. The flaw shipping manifests for private yachts were informal, but they weren't mythical. Yacht club logs, lighthouse keepers' notebooks, even the nosy diaries of summer neighbors. If a woman of Isadora's stature boarded at night, someone would have preened to record it. No one does. The lighthouse log at Castle Hill that week reads weather, whales, and nothing notable. Theory 2, family asylum. The Gilded Age had a velvet term for silencing troublesome women, rest cure. There were institutions, respectable bank, quiet, where a wealthy family could secure a diagnosis of hysteria and a private room. Butler Hospital in Providence took such patients discreetly. Admissions under assumed names were routine. A brother's telegram commanding silence. An attorney who closes doors. Mirrors draped because inside that house, the family had decided to mourn the woman they put out of sight. In this reading, the bricked room is a reliquary maintained by the household, an empty tomb for a woman not dead, and thus not allowed a public funeral. The phrase, "I will not be erased," becomes a counterspell, left like a coin on the tongue of the one place in the house that might speak for her. The obstacle. Butler's admissions from that period are sealed. Euphemisms and donor influence were thick. We are left with a pattern other cases make painfully plausible. Theory 3. Murder and masonry. There is a simpler story that socialites and historians dislike, because it makes rich rooms feel dangerous. She was killed the night of the ball. In this version, the carriage delivers her to her own library. There is an argument, over money, over letters, over a man's reputation, over a woman's refusal to sign. A fall, a blow, panic. The mirrors are draped as ritual or as signal to servants to keep appropriately silent. The trunks are packed to imply flight. The dress and gloves, locked away behind brick, are relics of staging. The calling card with its defiant line is either Isadora's last assertion of control or a bitter flourish by someone who understood irony as a kind of punishment. The flaw no body, but Newport soil is patient, and the ocean's rhetoric permanent. Bodies vanish all the time when their vanishing is convened by money. Theory 4. The Ouroboros Society. The snake devouring its own tail is an ancient emblem, but it had a very modern vogue in the 1880s among esoteric clubs and private salons where psychical research shared tables with very ordinary lust. Was Isadora a member of a circle that felt threatened by her disclosures? Did she plan to publish letters that would embarrass men who could end careers? A guest list from an early summer salon on Cycles and Fate shows initials beside names. 2 correspond to men at the ball. This theory suggests occult trappings masking very worldly motives: black, draped mirrors, sealed letters, a small coterie with a big appetite for control. Skeptics counter that symbols are cheap. Elites borrowed snakes and stars like they borrowed accents. The only concrete serpent we have is on a seal. Theory 5. She did it herself. What if "I will not be erased" is not defiance but a summary? Isadora, reading the tide in her own house, the trust closing ranks, the papers sharpening knives, the lovers falling back, concludes that the only way to control the story is to write herself out of it. She stages flight. She directs the draping. She leaves the room behind brick with tokens of a life that will, she hopes, be argued over until no one can claim authority over it. She vanishes into an alias, a city where her ships do not dock, a continent where her name is not a key. The obstacle money leaves trails. No subsequent woman in Paris or Venice seems suddenly well funded and aged in just the way a Newport widow might become. But those who slip between classes leave fewer ripples. Perhaps that was the point. Who investigated? Officially Newport police, who preferred scandal to be short and containable. The family attorney, who believed his job was to convert trouble into paper. Perhaps a private Pinkerton man. There is a single line in a Providence account book in September 1889 Z. Retainer. P. Domestic matter. Unofficially a society columnist who kept drafts of the lines she wasn't allowed to print. A housemaid who told her niece the mirrors were draped before she came on shift. A caretaker in 1903 who wrote in the margin of his work order, "Found a room inside a room." The records called it shame and closure. The locals whispered, "She never left the hill." After Isadora, Newport perfected its talent for absence. The Pennington name is included in donors' lists in a smaller font, then not at all. Her portrait disappears from a stairwell. A similar one, with a similar dress, appears in an auction catalogue undated and unattributed as Lady with C. The family attorneys sell off a piece of the Ochre Point property quietly. The remaining house hires staff at half pay to keep the fantasy that someone might arrive. In 1903, the bricked room's inventory moves briefly through public hands and dives again. The dress and gloves, if they exist outside that foreman's entry, live where such things live, in a cedar chest in a room where people speak softly about great-great-aunts and never open the lid. The calling card survives because it was misfiled. The telegram survives because its language is perfectine, an edict condensed to a curse. Newport has a sense of humor about its ghosts. Docents tell origin stories with a half smile. In the neighborhood where the Pennington lawn once met salt wind, residents say that on certain fogs, thick ones that flatten sound, you can hear a carriage turn where no road exists, and something like silk brush a wall that isn't there. In the library of a house that swallowed another house, a bricked seam reflects afternoon light, like a vein under skin. But the legacy that matters isn't spectral. It's structural. The Gilded Age built systems for erasing people inconvenient to wealth. If you mislaid a wife, you could call it rest. If a woman demanded control of her fortune, you could call it hysteria. If a scandal threatened your access to coal or credit or committee, you could call it shame and have it absorbed by silence. Mirrors in polite houses wore black not only for the dead, but for the living you chose not to see. I will not be erased. In the mouth of a woman in 1889, it is both plea and incantation. It is an assertion that the archive now tests. What remains of Isadora's life comes to us in artifacts that slipped our net. A telegram that says everything by saying nothing. A calling card that says little by saying everything. An incomplete letter with a seal that means eternity as a form of hunger. Her story is the shape of a woman pressed between money and reputation until she either bent or broke. Perhaps the truth still lies hidden in a ledger of Butler Hospital admissions under a false name, in a yacht club minute book where a member erased a line too vigorously, in the back of a bureau where a lady's maid folded a letter she couldn't bear to throw away. Perhaps someday a construction crew will open a wall in another house on Ochre Point and find a second small room with a second small message that confirms or confounds everything. Or perhaps we have all we will ever have: a carriage, a house that performed mourning without a body, a room that performed burial without a corpse, and a sentence on a card that refuses to cooperate with anyone's version of the past except her own. We stand on Bellevue Avenue with the late light going gold and a wind that smells like salt and roses and thyme. The ball is over. The orchestra went home. The carriage has turned a corner, no map marks anymore. The mirrors wear black. The trumps wait open. The letter stops in the middle of a word. The family telegram slams the lid shut, and behind one wall, a card keeps saying it, "I will not be erased." Which theory makes the most sense to you? Did Isadora, trapped by a trust and a season that loved a scandal more than it loved a woman, slip away on a private yacht no clerk was bold enough to record? Did her family consign her to a rest, so permanent it felt like burial, while leaving her house to practice grief? Did violence happen in that library, dressed up later with trunks and mirrors, and a room within a room left like a private tomb for memory's sake? Or did she stage her disappearance to seize a life the rules would never have granted her, leaving a message only an honest future would understand? Tell us in the comments. What detail disturbed you the most? The mirrors draped before anyone knew of a death, the half-written letter sealed with a serpent, or the calling card discovered in a bricked room 14 years later? And if you're listening from Rhode Island, or from a town where the Gilded Age left more shadows than statues, we want to hear what your archives whisper. If this episode pulled you in, tap like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss our deep dives into America's darkest historical mysteries. Share this with someone who thinks Newport was only about yachts and picnics. Under the lace, there were always knives. And tell us where you're tuning in from. Our community runs from coastal mansions to prairie farmhouses, and your tips help us decide which sealed rooms to open next. In our next episode, we'll unspool another erased life, the Midwestern sanatorium, whose ledgers replaced names with numbers, where a storm night misaligned every clock, and where one nurse's marginal note, "Not released, reassigned to River," is the only trace a vanished ward ever left. You won't want to miss it.